Welcome everybody to the October 29th, 2021 meeting of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. Hi everybody. This was a week. So this was a week, but a lot of work got done, and I'm just looking forward to going over it. So we're going to spend most of our time talking through that process this meeting. So with the agenda, just a quick review. We will have an update from Jane on the latest Climate Council meeting. They're meeting every week.
One of those, I have to hit #0.
There we go, Sue. And then we will review the draft sections of the CAP that you folks so diligently got submitted and ahead of time, and talk about the presentation of high priority actions to the Climate Council on the 9th, and then discuss some next steps and public comment. Are there any changes to the agenda and or the meeting minutes that don't appear to actually be linked in the agenda? So we'll have to make sure to get those linked for next week's meeting.
Yeah, like in my head, I had pictured him and you just on the phone.
Any changes?
I just want to take a moment at some point in the agenda to talk about resources for this committee moving forward.
Good.
Great. Okay, so with that, why don't we start off with an update from Jane on the Climate Council meeting.
Great afternoon, everybody. Another beautiful Friday before it transitions to rain for the weekend. So glad to be here. So wanted to check in on the council meeting. It's like I had to think about it because they're coming so fast and furious at this point. But the council meeting this week was another productive one. We focused first on hearing from, as I call into Zoom, my call waiting, beeping. First, we got to finally hear from Senator Kesha Ron Hinsdale on the EJ bill, which for many subcommittees is percolating up as the top recommendations to support. So it was really nice to have her come in and speak to the history of how the bill has gotten to this point, and speak to the main components of it. And Commissioner Walk also spoke to some of the components with respect to how it overlaps with A&R, because there are specific obligations for A&R within the bill. I encourage folks, if you didn't see it, to watch her presentation. It was great at the beginning. We then, the focus of the meeting was to really speak to how things were going with using the scoring rubric in the subcommittees, and we were able to pivot and evolve that conversation to talk more broadly about the challenges of time and equitable distribution of resources. As Catherine noted, I think in her update for the agenda, to talk about specific to this subcommittee on where we'll be able to get to for this first climate action plan with respect to the strategies and actions for rural resilience and ag and eco, and the specific comment around the ability to use the action tables. And so since then, we were able to pivot with hopefully clarifying guidance for you all that actions will simply be bulleted for both of those subcommittees' work, and then the speaking to the foundational criteria, which includes equity, as well as a focus on next steps to build out the ideas for each, will be at the strategy level. And so I think that's reflected in the work that you put forward for your drafts for us to look at today. So the council supported that, and I think there'll be further work to do around how we consider and think about how we take the work further and not give short change to the resilience, adaptation, sequestration, and storage work that we know is so important for lifting up climate action comprehensively. So in addition to that, we considered mostly for the substance of the meeting was around scientific components of the climate action plan. The CAP approved the recommendations from Ag and Eco around how to further advance work that came out of the carbon budget report, as well as set forward an understanding of what year we would use as the baseline for the inventory, that being 2018, and some recommendations around what sectoral proportionality would be, how it would be considered. Those are all online if folks are interested in looking at. And then we reviewed the other components of the climate action plan coming from the Science and Data Subcommittee, largely around the social cost of carbon, and then the intro section for that. So that was largely the bulk of the meeting. I'm not sure if I missed anything, but happy to answer any questions. And just for folks for interest, the work for next Tuesday's meeting will be sort of a preview to how we'll be thinking about the work from your subcommittee the following week, which is we'll be looking at all of the emissions reductions work coming out of cross-sector. I'm waiting for one more piece, and they'll all be posted shortly for council members to review. Also coming with the different sections from cross-sector will be a cheat sheet, like an action list, so that counselors can see everything really succinctly in one page and then focus their attention on where they want to go to learn more about an action that they have a specific question about. And that cheat sheet will be used to guide a survey for counselors in order for us to not spend the whole council meeting really focused on sort of presentation of information. The presentation will actually be pretty concise from cross-sector. They only have a half an hour to present, and then the substantive time at the second half of the meeting will be really trying to dive into and discuss the issues that counselors lift up through that survey, so that we can ultimately reach consensus on a full package of actions for the climate action plan. It's a little different than we've done in
Jane,
the past.
can you I just want to clarify a point. You said reach consensus on the actions. The intent at next week's meeting is not to reach consensus on the actions we're just seeing later today, correct?
Yeah, it's just hoping for us to flag where we won't have consensus and need to do more work. But no, we won't be taking any action around adopting anything on Tuesday with cross-sector, just discussing.
Any questions for Jane, or anybody want to add anything? So perhaps this is a good time to just interject quickly what I wanted to add to the agenda, which was a discussion about resources. As many of you know, we have consistently asked for additional resources for our committee. And for whatever reason, that did not come to fruition. Really, we did get the additional assistance from Marion, which was great. But beyond that, the additional resources we've sought really haven't been available to us. And so I think it would be really helpful if this committee supports just a committee supported request, both to the steering committee and the council, that as the budget is built for next year, that we have an opportunity to weigh in and identify our priority needs for capacity to further our work. And so that's my question to you. Is that something you think would be worthwhile and helpful? And if so, would you support that?
Well, I have concerns. No, I'm teasing. Yeah, that would be super helpful. There's a lot of things that I think, I've talked several times in this committee about the need to actually quantify the VMT reduction and co-benefits of smart growth. And that's going to take some money and effort to do. It's beyond the scope of what we can do in-house. So I'd like to see that get elevated and budgeted. But I kind of, I think I've said, we're out of time, and there's a whole lot more work that's needed to do, I think, on this plans to kind of meet people where they are. And that takes a lot of time and effort to do. So capacity to support that engagement, it would be important.
Thanks, Chris. Chris? I'll come to you, Jane, no worries.
Yeah, I sent out to the steering committee a request to develop a budget for the coming year. And including whether or not we need to make a request of the legislature. But to my mind, what you're proposing, Catherine, would be very, very helpful. Yeah.
Thanks for that steering committee perspective, Chris.
We need any specifics, or just the way you put it, which is we just need more resources?
Yeah, and I think giving us the opportunity to weigh in on and develop those resource needs and weigh in into the budget for next year.
And if I can just tack on to that, Catherine, I mean, I think part of what would be helpful is even reflecting back the challenge in the drafting, that other committees had the resources to better flesh out those different aspects of the actions that this committee just didn't have the opportunity to do. I mean, that's a very real world need, that we identified here at the last minute.
Not at the last minute, we identified it.
Well, no, right, but I mean, in the execution of the plan, draft the plan, right? No, you guys have been requesting this for a while. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to diminish that at all. No, I get it.
We have a lot of work to do
We do.
to meet the requirements of the GWSA. So, this was the really big the first big piece. So not only will we have, some of the research and data behind being able to support advancing what we put into the climate action plan, but we also have some, baseline items that were outlined in the GWSA that we're supposed to deliver on as a committee.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that reminder, Erica. Yeah, and Anne noted one in the chat. Jane, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I guess I think that this would benefit from a little bit of clarity. I guess I'm a couple questions. Well, first, there were technical resources via contractual services offered early on to the subcommittee, especially for the Municipal Vulnerability Index, and there was a recognition that we weren't ready to contract out those resources. And so I just want to say that, and then there are probably no different number of state staff on this subcommittee really than there have been with other subcommittees. So I guess I'm interested in understanding as you lift this up, just to be explicit in what the ask is. And then two, I just want to suggest that we have remaining funds in the GWSA budget that will certainly be a priority with the council to determine where those funds go, and after we adopt a plan and see the comprehensive need of next steps for technical analyses. We have roughly $300,000 left in this year's budget, and we've already done our budget appropriation for this year, and ask for an additional, I can look it up so I don't misstate, but it's roughly in the ballpark of an additional $1 million for technical services contracts to advance the work of the climate action plan. I think that it is really important to be clear in your request, and then all of that will have to be vetted with the council amongst all the other competing priorities that are coming up. I mean, there's technical, we're not moving forward with any new contracts right now. Like we have an RFP for the agricultural component for the inventory. We have the life cycle analysis. We have the VMT reduction. We have carbon forecasting. We didn't do any economic analysis yet of priorities. We only did a macro level economic analysis. So there's a lot of need out there, and just want to suggest that honing in clarity around that would be helpful.
I agree. And I think that's something we can work on. I don't think it's something we can work on at this moment. And I think at this moment, what's important is elevating the issue if everybody on the steering committee is in agreement with that. I see nodding heads. All right, so I'm going to draft up something that we can send, just a very short memo note, and I'll send it out to subcommittee members and ask that you get back to me directly, individually, not replying all, with any comments you might have about that before I send it off to the steering committee and the rest of the council. Thank you all for that. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Catherine. Do we want to move into the review of our draft documents that were posted?
I think that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. Well, first things first, I need to give a big shout out to Bronwyn Cook. I didn't know this. Chris told us that Bronwyn, you've only been with the agency for like less than 6 months. You are a pro, and you're a pro, of course, but you definitely are a Vermont pro for sure. this would not have been possible without your organization, your leadership, bringing all of the pieces together to make it really simple and straightforward to be able to put our information in, and asking the hard questions about what our information looks like. I was getting emails from you late at night, early in the morning, and it's really apparent that you care and are passionate about this area, and Vermont is really lucky to have you, and we're really lucky to have you. So thank you.
That's exactly the response I was hoping to.
And please don't let this effort scare you off. We want you to stay in Vermont forever.
Oh, no, I'm doing this because this is a comfort zone for me.
Wow.
There's no such thing as perfect. I've tried this before. It's always, I'm bringing a level of comfort and experience, and I appreciate hearing that I'm applying it well in the Vermont context. So thank you.
Yeah.
I have one request
go ahead,
though.
Chris.
You need to
Yes.
stop saying, "I'm not from here, but."
Yeah. So on our calendar appointment for today, you'll see the links to the documents that were uploaded, and I haven't really outlined a way to walk through these, only to maybe just pull up the biggest document, which has I believe all of the pathways. Maybe I think it may have just been missing one pathway, and they'll get combined, and kind of walk through element by element. Jane's got her hand up. She probably already has a plan. So let me stop talking. And Jane, what would be the most helpful way to go through this?
No, Pat might have a good suggestion for that and a plan, but I did just want to name sort of and call out the process from here, because I think that was helpful with Ag and Eco prior to going through their documents, so that you can all understand what we're trying to get to with these first drafts of documents today. The intent is that by Tuesday night or Wednesday early morning, I don't want to say Wednesday early morning yet, but Tuesday night, let's say Tuesday night, they will all be posted for the council. And so right now you have the pieces are somewhat disparate. So we'll have to think about how the drafters get edits from you all after today, a timeline for that, and a timeline for those folks to incorporate edits and changes. And then the best process will be for one person to assimilate all of it into the final document for section, I think this is section 12 of the CAP, like building resilience and adaptation in the built environment. And something else, Chris, I haven't actually made that change to the CAP outline, but we're calling it built environment and communities, I think, for the heading that I had.
Communities and the built environment.
Communities and the built environment. Thank you, Marian. So we'll make that heading, but it would be nice for one person to pull it all together. Happy to help support that, Marian and I, or happy to have someone from you all do that. So just want to identify that by the end today.
That would be great if you guys could help, because we kind of trying to close this one off because we've got the next section to actually draft next week. So we're going to have to be focused on that.
Chris, you mean the next section? By which section do you mean?
15.
Okay, gotcha.
The cross-cutting pathways, yeah.
I thought it would be helpful before we just jumped into the details of the section for those who had a chance to look at the work, all of it, which I got through all but the very last few pages of pathway 2. So I got through most of it. Do you have a sense that collectively it's a good reflection of our goals and our direction and the message that we want to give in this topic area?
Maybe you want to start, Catherine, with like the big question you just asked, then we can work through the details in a little bit. But maybe that's a good start, is taking a step back.
Or am I the only one that had a chance to look through it?
Catherine, Dale Azaria has a comment.
Thank you so much. So I did take some time to review this draft, and I want to start by saying that it is really an impressive piece of work. So hats off to everyone who was involved in it. As I review it, most of what I see are, in terms of actions, are programs of providing financial and technical assistance. And what I don't see much of are any kind of requirements or regulations. And while I think that the programs and the assistance are really important, I don't think that they are going to be enough to really change the trajectory that we're on in terms of resilience without adding in some requirements. So the letter that CLF submitted in early October had some examples of that, but just to give an overview of the kind of things I'm thinking about, there's financial and technical assistance to utilities to plan for the impacts of climate change, but no requirements that they do so. And that would be in the energy sector, in the water sector, in the wastewater sector. I think that setting those as expectations backed up by financial and technical assistance would make a much bigger impact. Likewise, and this one may be in that cross-cutting sector section, so it may just not be applicable, but a statewide permitting program for river corridors and flood hazard areas, would make a big difference in helping us stop digging this hole that we're trying to get out of. And likewise, updating the state's building code, which, right now is mostly focused on fire hazards and has a bit of flood hazards, but doesn't say anything about our buildings being habitable in cases of extreme heat. It has not been updated to account for increased freeze-thaw cycles and the heavier snow loads that we're getting with so much more moisture in the air. So I just would encourage you to think deeply about some requirements to put some real oomph behind the great programs that are already listed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Would anybody like to respond to any of Dale's comments?
Yeah. Hey, Dale. Great to see you. All fair points. I think the whole process right now is not as transparent as I would want it to be. And I would go so far as to say it's been a little chaotic. But a lot of the things that you have flagged and elevated will be addressed. If you look back at the revised cap outline, there's a whole building code section. And many of the other things that you flagged are now moved to our cross-sector compact settlement piece, which will have elements of land use, transportation, and kind of natural resource ag kind of protection. So I think that's where good points, and they just haven't been addressed yet.
That all sounds great. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for asking about that, Dale, because I think those are the kind of big picture things that, looking at our work as a whole, we want to make sure we didn't, through this chaotic process, inadvertently lose big chunks of things that we wanted to make sure we included. I would say from my perspective, I found collectively our work, your work, because I didn't write any of this, to be really great. And I thought was a true reflection of the work of our subcommittee and what we were trying to achieve in terms of setting a stage for immediate action and getting us in a good place for future action. So I was really pleased overall with the product that our team produced. So thank you, everybody.
Great. Any other kind of big step back reflections for now?
And I'll add, I had fewer comments on our 20 pages than I had on some of the 2- and 3-page stuff I got before.
Bronwyn has a comment. Go ahead, Bronwyn.
I think I may have had the most privileges in terms of getting insight into the full set of pathways, primarily because I was controlling the document. I agree with Catherine. I think it's pretty impressive how this has all come together to be a pretty comprehensive set of pathways and strategies with some really well laid out actions. One of the reflections that I wanted to offer in thinking about this is, it's very clear that we know a lot about flooding impacts. We know a lot about those impacts to infrastructure, but it's pretty clear that we talk less about sort of the human elements of this. And so I do think that's appropriate. That's the whole point, right? Is we haven't necessarily done that work yet to better understand some of the cascading effects. Once your house is flooded 4 times, or once a business has flooded 4 times, what does that then do in terms of cascading effects on health and economic vitality, et cetera. So I do think this is a really good body of work. And I think there's language in there that really tees us up to expand that resiliency work, to start incorporating that human element and thinking more broadly about resiliency. So I think that's really promising.
I think, Ben, did you have a comment too?
Oh, yes, thank you. I agree with what Bronwyn just said. We had similar conversations working on the state hazard mitigation plan when we recognized that flooding is what's coming right at us every year, and it is the greatest objective hazard that we must address, but that there are all these creeping hazards that take a long time to even study and understand and respond to. And there's a lot of work to be done on heat islands and tree planting in urban settings and invasive species and what we're actually going to do about them. And there's a tremendous amount to be done. But my general comment is that Stephanie and I were exchanging texts. We both read the document quickly. I got about as far as you did, Catherine, and we're both really impressed. I mean, it's actually amazing that this worked, because we've had all these big conversations, and sometimes we didn't know if everything was being captured and whether it was all going to get in there. And from the standpoint of folks working on a particular action component, it's so gratifying to see it captured and framed properly. And we're feeling pretty good about the work this committee has done.
Right. Good, Catherine, for what it's worth, here's a thought. I mean, one thing we could do, because of just our time, is each chapter author could generally describe what they did. If there's any issues they want to highlight or have the group discuss, maybe they name them first, just if they kind of know what they are. And then if we want to look at maybe the opening statement in particular on screen, we can. And then just to follow up on Jane, what Ag and Eco did, which you guys may not want to do, is they said any of the members who want to give an author comments by Monday noon can do so. Authors will do their best to incorporate those changes that day. And then someone will get the whole document Tuesday morning, or the pieces of the document to get a thread into one for posting. So that's one way we could do it if you want to. So
I'm good with that, but I just want to double check with our primary authors here regarding being able to incorporate comments, or whether we want to try and gather comments right now and incorporate them over the weekend, or kind of both. So, from my perspective on the opening statement, I'm happy to, wait till Monday to get comments and then be able to incorporate Monday afternoon. What do other primary authors think?
I would like to limit comments to major substantive problems, issues, not wordsmithing, because we're going to go through a whole nother comment round with the Vermont Climate Council. And I just don't have a lot of time to do this wash, rinse, repeat, edit process.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thanks, Joe. And Bronwyn, did you want to add anything more, or Anne? No. Okay, Jane.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but I will say that, having not read it super closely, but read it, there is like grammatical work and changes and like formatting and all that kind of stuff that does need to happen also. I don't think we need to do it in this meeting right now, but that is a job for somebody.
And Jane, so the authors have worked so hard, can we figure out how to get that last task to, me, state staff, somebody, so that the folks who wrote to do that? Okay, good.
Great.
All right. Bronwyn.
Just to say that we'll probably need to work out some sort of document sharing thing. I think it worked pretty well with, I own the document and I was giving folks either view access or edit access if they were writers. And so I think I'll just have to figure out another way of getting people the ability to make comments in the document if that's the best way, or just to say, you know, if it is going to stay very high level and substantive, then it maybe can just be in an email as opposed to actually going into the document, which saves us from accidentally deleting whole sections or something of the sort.
Raman, to that really good point, and maybe Marion wants to say about SharePoint, and also to Chris's point, if we limit people's comments to put them in email, reference the page number, line number, whatever, then people won't get tempted to start wordsmithing in an actual document. That might be a way to avoid the problem Chris is trying to avoid.
Yeah, Jane asked me to speak to SharePoint. I agree. I think there are numbers for each line, so it might be easier for folks to just provide comment via email and reference the line number in which you're sort of referring your comment. Jane, to your question about SharePoint, we do have that SharePoint site that grants access to council members and subcommittee members who are listed as drafters in the outline. I'm not sure if that lines up with providing view access to folks. I think if we wanted to provide view access to everyone on the subcommittee, we'd have to still go through IT to do that.
Oh, ouch.
It's not a huge deal, but it's an extra step. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we do it Bronwyn's way where it's in OneDrive and, you know, the primary author can do it themselves.
So, well, I might be the primary author of Pathway 2 is really lots of folks contributed to it. And if somebody has a substantive comment, you know, I may not agree with it. You know, if I get something on Monday and someone says, hey, you know, change this to that. And it's like, I may not agree with that and may not want to make the change. And I'm not sure it's up to me to make that decision. And I sort of feel like what you have in front of you now is what we have. And, you know, and my understanding is like we're taking that and moving forward to the Climate Council. Sure, if something comes up in this meeting and we can work through it, that's fine. But I don't think we should be making, you know, substantive changes after today's meeting before something goes to the Climate Council. Because who makes that decision and how do we, you know, how do we figure that out if we're not all together?
Co-chairs, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the reasons why we need to walk through it now. I think we need to, if there's anything substantive, we need to have a chance to talk through it a little bit right now.
Right.
And we don't need to go line by line, but just, you know, it's pretty clear what's there in terms of the framing. If the authors can just talk about, you know, the message that they were trying to send and hone in on, and then we can leave it open for anybody that has any, you know, significant questions about the content. And then we can go from there. How does that sound, folks?
I'm good. Start marching in.
Okay.
All right. Do we want to start with, I don't know, do you want to start with Pathway 1 or do you have an overarching statement, Erica, you want people to look at first?
Well, there's the lead-in framing. I don't know if anybody has it up. I don't want to share my screen because I have to jump out here in 20 minutes. So if anybody else can share their screen.
I can share it and try and take larger notes in it, but just if folks are the primary author and are hearing comments on it, please keep notes for yourself as well.
Yeah. So so with the lead-in, you know, this is all a statement about why we're here. Why do we, you know, this is why we put all of these items forward. And so I was really trying to set the stage for the reason why we need all of these pathways and strategies and actions. So I really wanted to start off with a reminder of what we love about Vermont, and then move into why we need to protect it. So you'll see some references to like the National Climate Assessment, using some of our own science and data people as authors, and as well as some really interesting work that I've actually become familiar with through the National Emergency Management Association and the First Street Foundation, which looks at specifically more flood risk. I admittedly was pretty heavy on flood risk because, as Ben pointed out, it is one of the areas where objectively we still have a lot of work to do, and it's the one that gets us the most. It impacts us the most. Bronwyn later on in this lead-in did a really good job of zeroing in on the fact that we have other hazards like heat and other things that we have also incorporated into our recommendations. If you folks want to go down, just scroll down a little bit more, Marion. Just talking about increases in disaster declarations, and then a reminder about Irene. I think frankly, we would be remiss if we didn't start off a climate adaptation section and not remind ourselves of Irene, which truly, anecdotally changed the course in climate policy. At least from a flooding perspective, in my opinion. So a reminder about Irene, as well as some of the actions that resulted, that came about as a result of Irene, but then painting the fact that we have many more things to do. This next, starting on line 40, is a summary of primarily some of the goals that we've needed to achieve. So that paragraph, and then the paragraph starting on 50 also goes into that. A really important reminder about the disproportionate impacts of disasters on rural communities and BIPOC communities, recognizing that there's some that we need to, as we're implementing policy, we need to be mindful of that and allow that to shape policy from the beginning and not be kind of an afterthought. So it is about 2.5 pages. It was very difficult to say everything that needed to be said and framing this up in 2 pages. I think we got it down to as short as it can go. Admittedly, this was really difficult knowing that the next one is Pathways for Adaptation and Building Resilience, and I think it's like ecosystems. So it's really more the other half, and not really having visibility on what they are going to be writing in the lead-in. There's probably some overlap here, unfortunately, but I did try and keep it focused on, the built environment and our pathways.
Great. Questions, comments, thoughts for Erica's work? Again,
I want to thank Bronwyn and Ben for their assistance in editing this.
And again, kind of focus on the big stuff. If there's anything that you think is important that's missing, or any big statement that you disagree with strongly.
I thought it was good. I like that you framed the overall issue, and it might be a little bit repetitive to some of the things that I said, and I think, but not a lot. But I'm just wondering, and this gets to maybe the drafting of the complete document is maybe at some point, I hope there's like a master editor or something like that can sort of think about consistency and being concise and all that, and not repeating things that that have already been said, or that can just be referred to like above, as noted above, and then bang, you can just kind of go.
But. Any other things people want to share with Erica?
I'm just going to repeat Joe's comments. This does need an editor to ensure there's consistencies. Our styles are a little different. We're all kind of working in silos, and there is some repetition.
Yeah.
Kind of our messaging is not quite always consistent too. And it's hard for us doing these things on the fly to have that step back perspective and saying, how does this all hang together? So I assume there's a plan for that.
And the Chris's have a question. So Marion or Jane, what when this is, this is weeks down the road here, but this will be imperfect what we give on Tuesday. What is the plan for kind of the final master editor approach?
Jane is not on. She had to jump off for half an hour. I'm not sure I have a perfect answer. I think that is one of, at least for this section, and to Joe's point about what he wrote for Pathway 2 and fitting that into the broader section 13 on, section 12 on pathways for adaptation and building resilience in communities in the built environment is that there is one person who will volunteer to give that one voice to this section. So that was one of the things Jane identified at the beginning of this meeting is we need to determine who that's going to be, to look at all of the sections together to ensure that there's that one voice. For the overall view of final editor, I don't have a great answer to that. I think that is what the council has been discussing in great detail, is around the writing and then the editing of the sections as they fall to the subcommittees, and then how that gets pulled together for the CAP. So don't have a great answer for you, Chris. Sorry.
Well, let's keep going. Bronwyn, then Catherine, then Chris.
I don't know that this might be an editing thing, and it's probably not something we're gonna get it right and perfect the first time around, but I do feel that, especially with all the conversation on equity, especially the fact that we weren't prepared to do the equity screens, I do feel like this first intro, I think equity kind of deserves a solid paragraph. I think we can tease out what we really mean right now. If I'm trying to like put my equity hat on and think how someone might read this, it sort of sounds like, policymakers will give consideration to, which is important, but it's also really important. I think what we're hearing is that it's not just consideration to, but it's procedural equity. So I think we need to work on getting the language of that right and really internalizing that in this document. Just again, we're not going to get it the first time around, but I did want to flag that was one area where I felt like we could expand that a bit and use really consistent language from the Just Transitions document.
And I think Chris Campany, you actually just volunteered to write that paragraph. So I think unless there's other takers, I'd say absolutely.
The only caveat to that is, I think what we need to say is there's a lot more of that to be done, and owning that a lot has not been done in that front. And that so as the CAP is revised, we will be engaging with Vermonters on what those equity needs are, and those will be incorporated into the plan. I think we kind of need to acknowledge right now they're really not in there. But if you're okay with me drafting it that way, I'm happy to draft that section. But I don't want to represent that we did something that we didn't. And then by we, I mean the entire council.
Eric, are you, what if Chris writes that paragraph and gets that to you? Maybe I'm winging it here on
yeah, I definitely am supportive of that. I am not, when it comes to, I would welcome this on that.
Okay. So Chris, Monday, is that doable? Okay.
I'll be looking out for it, Chris.
Thanks, man. Catherine.
I don't need to say anything because Bronwyn said exactly what I was going to say, that it deserves a whole paragraph and section. So I'm all good now.
But are y'all okay with that approach? I mean, is that where we're coming from? Okay.
I think that makes sense, and tying it into the language that our Just Transitions guidance has is good.
I mean, how much flexibility do we have in terms of the length of this, and do we need to? If there is no flexibility, then is there a section in here that folks want to completely pare down and kind of strip out, because that's where we're at. Like I said, it was really hard to say everything that needs to be said to frame this up and still stay within the constraints of 2 pages.
Marion, I'm going to go with the theory that why is your paper so long? Because you didn't have time to write a short one. So I wonder if we can expand a little longer version in this draft that they're going to get. It's, we don't want 20 pages, but if we have 3, we have 3. And then there's some time in November to continue to hone a little bit. Marion, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I was going to ask, and this is my apologies, just because I've been out and I know there's been some changes to the approach for how to include equity in the assessment of actions or strategies. Did the subcommittee decide to do any consideration of equity at the strategy or pathway level, or is none of that going to happen?
Co-chairs.
It's not gonna happen
It's gonna
before.
happen. Okay, I wanted to ask, I got back late yesterday, so I haven't checked all my emails yet.
And Marion, I think it's fair to say that, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's fair to say that's pretty much consistent across the subcommittees. It's not just this one.
I think and Pat, correct me if I'm wrong, Ag and Ecosystems, I think, has done it at the strategy level.
Each group made a slightly different decision with very reasonable reasons. And you all decided, in order to be fair to equity, we're not going to do it halfway. We're just going to make the statement, Chris, you said, and not try to do something we think we're not going to do well.
Well,
Yeah.
I think we should clarify that we actually talked about doing the strategy level and we're told we couldn't do that. So we did not move forward in that way because we were told we couldn't.
Question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, because I wasn't sure what the development was, to understand how what Chris has volunteered to draft in a paragraph would fit into this introduction section. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I will say, I think just referencing, there is an equity section that frames up the guiding principles and the approach for developing those, which I think is what Bronwyn and others were pointing to pulling from. And that was reviewed by the council a couple of weeks ago. And then Just Transitions is also working on a section around equity, specifically around implementation. So as long as it complements those two components, I think that sounds great.
I don't know, Chris, did you have your hand up for something else, or Joe, did you have your hand up for equity?
Yeah, I do.
Oh,
Joe, you
that's
want
Chris.
Yeah, well, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I absolutely agree there should be a paragraph in here. And I think it's important to, just so it's sort of the overarching reason why it's not addressed and, through all of our pathway strategies and actions. I think that would be great because I wasn't really sure what to say about it. We were, I think in the email that Erica sent out where, when we got the message just to use bullets, she also mentioned, talking generally about equity. And I wasn't even sure how to talk generally about it and what to say about it. And so something that's upfront that does that, I think could be really useful. And my question is, and I don't know if it needs to be addressed now as part of, this paragraph or whatever, is like, well, where is the right time to address it? Because I'm not sure, like at this level of detail that we're working at right now. I mean, the reason we can't address it is because we just partially it's time, but partially it's also the level of detail and where sort of we are in this process. So when is the best time and the right time to address it? If not now, when?
And Chris Campany, I don't know if in your paragraph you can even partly address Joe's point about, when it would be important.
If you can answer that, Chris.
I mean, we have not had the ability to engage in it the way as a subcommittee and as multiple subcommittees in a way that we have not engaged with the public on these things. We've had focus groups, but we have not been engaging like directly with the public on, hey, pathways for adaptation and building resilience in communities and built environment. What do you need? We haven't gotten down to those brass tacks of policy and programmatic solutions to those issues. So that's, to my mind, we just kind of need to own. There's a lot of work. I mean, we've developed the principles. We've begun to try to apply, to use the principles as a frame and the rubric as a frame, but to actually fully apply that in a truly substantial way, that has not yet happened.
Yeah, and I think it needs to happen as the actions move forward themselves. I mean, to me, that seems like the place that you can really have the kinds of discussions that when you're focusing on this one action, that's the time to, go through follow the procedure outlined in the rubric, which is really complex and, and should result in all kinds of rich information, but it just will take time and commitment to make that happen.
Yeah. As a member of that subcommittee, I think they would also argue, Joe, that thus far these actions that the council hasn't even fully deliberated upon yet, we really haven't taken to the public yet to fully deliberate upon either.
Right.
So I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I'm just saying all of that still has yet to happen. And that's been part of, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, has been kind of the framing of the release of the initial plan, acknowledging there's going to have to be a lot of public engagement once that's put out there, so that to even inform what how we move forward with with continuing to evolve that plan.
Just because of time, so I think we've got, Chris, I think you volunteered to do it. We've got some good comments about what to include. Erica is going to welcome your paragraph when you're ready. And we'll proceed, at least in the short term, in that way, Erica.
And then Pat, I just want to address Joe's question about, when is the right time? I think just overall, big picture, we as a subcommittee, once we get past the plan review piece of this, we'll need to take a step back and kind of do a gut check about, how far we've come, what we still have left to do, and the strategy on how to do that. And I think that's where, we can have this conversation about needed resources and where to plug those in to be able to maximize our work, because there's still some ahead of us, and this equity piece is a big part of that.
Great. Anything else for Erica's first section before we move on to Pathway 1? All right, Pathway 1, who's our author there?
That's me.
All right, Bronwyn, over to you.
All right, I'm just gonna try and give a quick overview of the big editing that I did on this. So first big thing, I changed the header to be a bit less wordy. I think when we drafted it, we were trying to cram the entire idea into the header. Those words that I took out are still there. They're just now in the description paragraph, which is probably the appropriate place. I probably went a little bit overboard. Again, trying to think about I have to frame it all up. I think the whole first paragraph maybe not necessary if it was covered well in our intro. It has to do, the first paragraph is answering the question, why do we care about doing resiliency work? Why do we need to do more capacity building around resiliency work? And that maybe is just as well covered in our opening 2 pages. And then the last paragraph is trying to pull in equity. Maybe this is the paragraph that can be, again, pulled into those 2 pages. So whoever's doing, Chris Campany, feel free to strike that from Pathway 1 and just move it into the front, because I do think it's an overall equity piece as opposed to just the capacity piece. Pathway 1. Other things that I did, I reordered the strategies. It seemed like talking about providing tools first was a good thing. Let's provide, create and provide some tools, including climate resilience. We've talked about a toolkit, including existing tools. Maybe they've been reworked a little bit to account for other climate impacts. New tools that we're going to be creating, like the vulnerability index. It seemed like it made sense to talk about tools first and then talk about technical support and funding support, which is the second strategy. So I just reordered things a bit. Strategy 1, 2, and 3. I also changed the headers in the same way. I made them a bit less wordy, but then I just moved those words into the summary paragraph. And then the last 2 big things, strategy 4 and 5. If I'm remembering correctly, I don't have to because it's right in front of my face. Strategy 4 was workforce development. Strategy 5 was civic engagement, community engagement. I think both of those would do well to be moved over into section 15, cross-cutting. I know that there's a lot of recommendations coming out of other subcommittees around workforce development and making sure we have the skills and the people that can do this work, and also ensuring that we are supporting better community engagement. I don't think those need to be specific to resilience or specific to mitigation. I think those recommendations and those strategies can be trying to tackle doing that work for both outcomes, for both resiliency and mitigation. So those are the big changes and edits that I made, in addition to adding the paragraphs for each strategy.
Thank you. So everybody okay if we actually suggest moving 4 and 5 to, again, that other chapter? Any concern about leaving it in here in particular?
I guess the one concern I have is it's unclear to me at this time who that author is for that.
Marion, do you know who's holding the workforce?
For the cross-cutting pathways?
Yeah.
So that's being determined by the cross-cutting pathways group. Sorry, again, just coming back in the office, I don't know what has been happening with that group since I was out, so I don't have a great answer for you.
Yeah,
But it would be within that group assignments. And I believe that group discussed identifying what those cross-cutting pathways were. And I think I saw an email with a list of those. I'm not sure if workforce and community participation were already included in that.
No, you're absolutely correct. There's a bunch of cross-cutting pathways identified, but there's nobody identified to write them. And so my concern is if we move it there and nobody's taking responsibility, then what happens to it?
I mean, so if it stays here, it's my responsibility to write it. So I won't be the first. I mean, if there is someone else from cross-cutting that wants to or was planning on writing something about workforce development, is better suited to write something about workforce development than they should. But I have to write something eventually anyway, whether it stays here or goes there. So I guess I'll be the backup to doing that. I mean, I did already write something about increased community participation. It's just not very strong because I made a very wonderful statement about what it should be, but then we only really have one action underneath it. And so it sort of deflates a bit. So I think if it were to move, this whole paragraph around community participation can move over there and include our actions plus other actions from other subcommittees, or it can get edited by someone else. And then the workforce development piece still needs to be written.
Yeah, so I think, Bronwyn, you have a great point about it is stronger if there's more actions underneath it, and I think makes a much stronger case if it's actions from the other subcommittees as well. So Chris, let's flag that for conversation with that cross-cutting themes group. The intent of that group is to draft this cross-cutting pathway section, so it should be an author from that group. I just don't know the status of assigning that work. So we'll talk to Jane about that.
Right, and maybe for now, we leave it in just because certainly the council can say, oh my God, there's too much redundancy, go fix X, Y, and Z, but you don't want to lose stuff right now. So maybe we'll leave it in for the time being. And if you find a way, you land a home for it, great, then you'll do so. Other comments for Bronwyn on pathway 1?
I thought it was really well done. Just a reminder that it's not that we don't have more actions under that, it's just the high priority actions. And so the act of prioritization left us for some of our strategies without a large number of actions. And this is more of an editing thing, but it's also a messaging thing. I'm wondering if we should, when we list our actions, if it should say high priority actions under all of those headings rather than just actions, just to make it clear. Since we don't have the table where that's called out, that kind of gets lost that these are just the high priority ones. And I support moving those 4 and 5, as you noted.
To your point, Catherine, about noting, I think there's a section above this that's how to read this plan and how it's formatted, and it will note that all of the actions in here are those high priority actions or actions that the subcommittee chose to elevate that were medium or low. But if you think it would be make a bigger impact to call them out as high, we could do that as well.
Might be good just to make that clear, even in each header, because then it'll be really clear to Catherine's point about the header piece, in addition to the good thing Marion you said, and maybe we can just make that consistent across all these. Okay, anything else for Bronwyn on pathway 1? Okay, pathway 2, was that Anne? Who was pathway 2?
It's Joe Segali.
Joe, over to you. All right, why don't we flip, and we'll come back to this document. I think I'll just go in order to keep track, if that's okay. So Joe.
All right, let me finish this comment, then I'll switch.
Sorry.
We have one screen here.
While Marion's doing that, I'll just say, it was like I mentioned previously, there was a bunch of folks that contributed to this, including Anne and Mike, and then Lynette Clouden is also here today from DEC, and there was a group of folks there who helped provide input to not just provide input, they wrote the water and wastewater actions. And I put them under quite a bit of pressure because it was just a little bit of a hole that we had. And so the way that I organize this is, I talk about these infrastructure sectors, transportation, energy, and water, and why they can be considered critical infrastructure. And there's a definition there that came from, I'm not going to remember his name now, the VEM folks probably do. He did a presentation to us here, and has a definition of what critical infrastructure is. And then this, the preamble here is, or the framing, I organized it around those 3 different infrastructure sections, and each one of those is, we try to be as brief as possible, but thought it was important to talk about, just describe what this infrastructure is and big picture, and then why it's important, and then what the threats are relative to climate change. Just, because while I know quite a bit about transportation, I felt it was really informative to me to learn a lot about, electrical distribution through the conversations and debates between Ann and Mike, when we were doing the prioritization, and then all the work that the water folks did and the description down there. It's also thinking about who are the stakeholders that are involved, because there's kind of different groups of stakeholders involved in each of those infrastructure sections. And I think that lays the groundwork too for thinking about implementation later on. So it got longer because of that, because we're dealing with these 3 infrastructure sectors. It got longer. And then the one other sort of important infrastructure sector that we don't really have much information on is the communications. And I think, all of those of you who were involved with Irene know just the importance of communication, because that broke down in a lot of ways. And so we have to figure out, and now obviously we're not going to do that between now and Tuesday, but how to engage the communication sector, which is, a diverse group of private entities. And I think, Mike and Ann have some experience working with those folks. And I think you guys even reached out to them to some extent, but it's just hard to sort of corral them. So it's just a limitation, I guess, to this section.
Yeah,
so,
Joe,
yeah.
to that point, I think we talked about them piggybacking on a lot of the energy stuff too, especially where it was connected to the grid. We were banking on that a little bit.
Right, so there's definitely that overlap. But whether there's other strategies or other actions that, that group, the communication sector needs to take, we just don't know yet. I mean, I imagine there'll be a lot of that in this plan, like still some gaps that need to be figured out as time moves along. But just, you can keep scrolling down. That I appreciate Bronwyn's comment about sort of making the strategies more concise. It didn't occur to me, but as I'm looking at that, it's not so bad. At least it starts with an action verb. And this first one is, this is really all the planning work that needs to be done and research that needs to be done, and it, the introduction just kind of makes the point that there's still a lot to be done when it comes to resilience and infrastructure and understanding what the vulnerabilities are and how to prioritize that, and that's what the actions really are. And then I took this really not, I'll just say it, lame approach to thinking about equity in this, and just saying, the fact that all this planning work is going to be done is an opportunity to go deeper into equity as we start thinking about all of this. And that's why I was asking my when question. It's like, maybe that's the better time to do it rather than at this really high policy level, which is really where we are with this plan. And then I organize, when you look at the actions, it's organized by, there's some actions that affect all sectors, and then I just got to have it organized by each sector above. So you can we don't need to go through all those. And keep going till we get to the next strategy, I guess, if you really want me to talk about that. And this one was interesting because we only had one action, and it's about, the being prepared. And we had other, there were other media actions, but only one made it on the list. And, maybe that's okay, because, but it sort of made me wonder, is like, well, is this really a worthwhile strategy to have on here? I think it is, because I still feel like the point I made in the introduction was that being prepared is super important and being able to respond and recover quickly is really a key component of being resilient. And I think that in Vermont, we do a really good job of that already. And so that's why the list of actions really isn't as long on this particular strategy. And the next two, I won't say a lot about those, other than the first one is more about doing specific vulnerability enhancements. And then the last strategy is about more system-wide type actions. So that's it. Unless anybody else want to add anything? Any other my co-authors?
You know, I was thinking, I read it all again this morning, and I don't want to open Pandora's box here, but one thing I got to think of a little bit, specifically energy, right? We talked about the grid and everything that's electric. But it made me think, I know that we're using the grid to reduce GHG, but it made me think of, this is resilience too. And we didn't talk about any other type of energy sector thing. So, you know, until we get to that point, people still need to be warm. So that's the only thing that I thought about was, this works for the future, but it you know, it may pose some questions. You're talking about energy and you didn't include anything about keeping the thermal and transportation going in a severe event. So I just, that kind of
is that a nomenclature thing at this point? I mean, should, you know, like, let's just say exactly what we're talking about, which I think you said like the electrical distribution system. I mean, that we're not talking about energy in the broader sense of energy.
I
don't know. That's what I'm asking. I like, did we leave out?
Michael?
I think the answer is yes.
You know what? Propane. I know we're trying to reduce all these things, but.
Well, wind, like we don't talk about wind. We don't talk about solar, you know, as energy sources, right? If that's what you
Yes, but those are electrical. So those are, to me, they're tied into it, right?
Hydro.
Again, that's electrical.
So I think maybe Joe, because of time, if you want to have a simple sentence as we focused on X because of the future or the focus here, but there are other infrastructure considered too or something, that's a throwaway line, at least acknowledges it. I don't think we really have time to add it extensively, right?
Right.
But Mike, good point. And Mike, anything else before I go to Dale?
Nope, maybe Dale has input on that.
Yeah, over to you.
All right, not helping with that one at all. And once again, you know, I see a really great body of work here and feel a little bit bad about pointing out what else could be done. But I do think it's important to note here that none of these actions identify who's responsible for doing them. And in some of them, it's sort of obvious, but in many of them, it isn't. And I just want to flag that. Don't necessarily think it's realistic for anybody to get that done before Tuesday or whatever your next deadline is. But I think it's worth keeping in mind for future iterations that this would be a much stronger document if the responsible parties were identified.
We have the same, by the way, we have the same challenge in ag and eco. So to the well point taken that Dale made. Bronwyn, do you have a thought response to that?
Not to Dale's, I just was still thinking about the previous topic in energy resilience as opposed to just the grid. And it just, I'm just going to share a thought bubble just to put it out there. We can come back to it some other time. But it made me think of this idea of the difference between infrastructure resilience and community and the human resilience. And so there's a tie-in here to be made around identifying critical infrastructure, and people need to be warm, and there needs to be infrastructure to do that. In thinking again about how we plan for that, it may not be that we need to, you know, in the short term, we need propane to still move to homes. It may mean that in the short term, we need to make sure that every municipality has a place with backup energy that can provide heat and cooling in the event of outages or the event of extreme heat, so that we're not relying on everyone's individual home to provide that, especially in the immediate response to an event. So I just wanted to flag that your conversation there made me think of that, and made me think of this idea that we need to be thinking of infrastructure resilience, but also the community, the human resilience, because I think it shifts how we think about the solutions.
We've got several hands up. So I'm going to go Joe, Ben, Chris.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll just respond quickly to that because I mean, I've always felt like when it comes to transportation, it's not about the road or the bridge or the transit service. It's about the people that you're serving, and it's about, you know, economic vitality and quality of life. It's about why we have those systems, and it really is about community resilience over, you know, overall. So maybe that's a slightly different way to frame why the infrastructure is critical. But the other, this is more mechanical, but to Dale's question about, you know, who's responsible. And I think we all know, you know, we had those tables that we started to work with, and those tables really spelled out who, you know, so each action had a separate table that spelled out who was going to be responsible. And I actually completed the table for every one of these actions because, you know, I thought that's the direction we were going. And so, you know, that information is there. I just want to say, if we ever have to, I don't know what's going to happen. Are we ever going to go back to that? Or are we going to sort of, you know, and I actually think the two most important things in that table were the timeline and who's responsible. You know, the rest of it was the prioritization piece of it, which I feel like, you know, the prioritization was done. We can kind of move on from that. And now it's like those two things, who's responsible and when is it going to happen? And maybe this is another question for Marion or Jane, but at some point, I imagine there will be an implementation piece of this that will spell all of those things out.
I think I've got Ben.
Okay, yeah, so I'm flip-flopping back to Mike's comment and once again, following on Bronwyn's train of thought, I guess. I take the point that we're not addressing propane or heating oil and that bad things can happen while the transition is underway. But an energy over, not just the grid, but energy is one of the 5 lifeline sectors. So is transportation, and our real vulnerabilities on fossil fuel heating sources is bigger than just Vermont. It you know, it's a supply chain thing that's national and international, and the piece of it that we control is our transportation infrastructure. So I don't think there's too much we need to say here about the short-term vulnerability to horrific you know, supply chain challenges for fossil fuel delivery. But I think Bronwyn hit it on the head that the real place where rubber meets the road in terms of rural communities is heating and cooling shelters, and making sure that we have them everywhere and with backup generators. And backup generators have been a funding challenge within the emergency management world that I think should be named.
Chris and then Ann.
Responding to Joe, maybe, you know, I did the same thing. Went through all the pains and labors of identifying a party and timeline. Perhaps, you know, once maybe I have an understanding of what Ag and Eco are doing, or maybe we suggest, you know, maybe it's just who the responsible entity is in the timeline, you know, as a parentheses, but just, you know, tell us how to do it before we go in there and do it. Maybe a good addition.
Right. And I would, and unless Marion disagrees or Jane's back on, I would say to keep that stuff, really good stuff. And let's not ask you to do more by Tuesday, other than final edits, and then we'll figure out from there the month of November. Ann.
Thanks. I did want to point out that the recommendations, the high priority recommendations we have in here are trending in the right direction in terms of at least mitigation of some of those other fuel sectors in the event of a severe weather event. In that, you know, we have, just like, you know, the transportation roads are the means by which a fuel truck is going to reach a customer. You know, electric distribution is the means by which, you know, a gas station is, you know, kept running. The pumps at a gas station can be kept running, for instance. So just like communications rides on electric infrastructure resilience, a lot of these other fuel sectors do as well, kind of ride on electric infrastructure resilience. And in terms of the heating, cooling shelters, I don't think we use those terminologies, but we have the resiliency zones as a priority for seeking federal infrastructure funds, because that's not something that's necessarily going to pay for itself. So you can't necessarily burden ratepayers with it. It's a broader societal goal. And so that gets into the who pays, but we do have it listed here, resiliency zones, places where there are continued services that a community can rely on in the event of extended outage. That is front and center in our recommendations here. So hopefully we hit that on the head somewhat.
Great. So,
Thanks for pointing that out, Ann. And, you know, we do cover all that. I was literally speaking more of the individual that's trying to heat their home. We just didn't cover any, you know, before there's transition to a different heating source. So thanks.
Real question, Joe. I think the only advice for you is maybe on this, if you want to add a sentence about their other, you know, some of the things we just talked about, if you want to add that up front, you're certainly welcome to in finishing this up. But I'm aware of the time. So anything else for Joe on 2 before we move on to 3? Okay. All right. Joe, anything else?
I'll help with that, Joe, since I opened the box there.
So are we getting, Marion will send us this back with the comments, I guess.
Yeah, Marion,
Yeah,
we can
just send me, if you have something, if you have a sentence or two, Mike, just send that along.
put Mike in capital letters. There we go. Make sure he knows.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, awesome. Okay, let's go to pathway 3, and we're back to that other document. Thank you, Marion. Give her a minute. And then also just note, I won't go into it right now, but Chris has actually had some suggested language on equity off to the right in the chat, which people may want to look at when they have a moment. Okay, who's pathway 3?
That was me.
Anne, over to you. Awesome.
Patrick. Thank you. I feel really challenged on this, and I'm guessing that my colleagues Chad and Dave also feel challenged. We just simply didn't have enough time, and we also didn't have Marion's help. And I think what we have here really suffers. I mean, to be honest, I was looking at an earlier document. I couldn't find the most up-to-date one. And so I missed the fact that we have only 2 pathways. I was looking at them all as that we had like 17 pathways, but we do have 2 pathways, which now I get it. So, I mean, I'm sorry, we have 2 strategies. So the first one, okay, well, let me go back a little bit. In the introduction that I wrote, that's not very, I mean, it's very short, which probably more could be added. And after the last few lines probably aren't necessary because they're probably covered in the introduction that Erica wrote. So going down through the strategies, I do recall that we identified them. We broke things down into 2 strategies. Number 1 is tools and resources, and number 2 is what we want to do. So strategy 1, the tools and resources, that actually harks back to pathway 1, strategy 1. It's pretty similar. And I'm not sure that I mean, maybe this isn't the time now to bring this up, but do we still want this like this? And then I think the actions make sense. And then going down to maybe you're right, Marion, to give people a little time to read this. But then in the second strategy, those actions would benefit from having the Joe approach to break them down and reorganize them so that, you know, who's affected, who is going to take this on, and what sectors this really relates to. That would I think make a big improvement. I've got to say that I don't think these actions are, I don't think we weaned them down sufficiently, because it appears that they're all high priorities. I'm not sure that is actually the case.
So with that,
so, I'm sorry, I can't make a better case, but I don't know. It's kind of how I feel.
what people have questions for Ann, or things that we can do in the short time we have to kind of, advance things along. I noticed a comment from Dave Snedeker in the chat, for what that's worth, with maybe a little bit more help there. But reflections, thoughts, comments on this. Chris Campany.
Can you scroll back up to the public buildings one? Oh, is it right there?
Which one? Sorry.
Scroll back up to the pathway, I think, or no, there's strategy one. Or even go. Okay, so Dave and Ann, what you might want to do, and Dave, I don't know how familiar or to what extent you remember what all you could point. I just put this in the chat. You could potentially point, and you don't have to get into details about it or even call us out, but you could potentially call out what RPCs did under the American Reinvestment Recovery Act, working on public buildings about doing the energy audits and managing projects for municipalities and schools because they don't typically have the capacity to do that. And then like we down here, and you don't have to call us out, this is not a shoulder padding thing, but down here we have specific funding through the VY settlement dedicated to us to convert, and we've done most of the schools in the region, convert them over to modern wood heat systems that also involve efficiency energy audits and other efficiency measures, so that those new systems were right-sized and properly scaled, and they're also redundant for greater resilience. So this is a case maybe where you could point to, real world programs and other work that we're doing now, right, with the efficiency utilities, trying to help convene and have the energy committees work together and all that groovy stuff. I mean, those are some concrete actions that have the potential to make a real difference. And one thing that's not in there perhaps is improving coordination among the various community action agencies. I know one of the challenges we have down here is just trying to help point people to which program does the most, meets their needs most appropriately and effectively. So there may be another action is local coordination. But anyway, that might help you out. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Chris.
Or not.
And thanks for that suggestion, Chris. I agree it will help out. I remember what we did back in the 2008, 2009 with the R money. So those would be good additions. And again, I gave credit to Ann in the chat. She carried the load for Chad and I this week. And so I appreciate that. And I'd still like to get some edits in over the weekend before Tuesday.
Great.
It seems like those would be great things to add to the discussion, introducing this particular pathway. Thanks, Chris. What struck me when I looked at this is when we went through the equity screen 2 weeks ago, last week, I don't know when it was, with Kaya on the navigators action. One of the things that we talked about is that disproportionately BIPOC individuals are renters versus homeowners. And most of our actions related to weatherization are either explicit to homeowners or are silent on the renter access. So I'm just wondering if we want to do any tweaks with the weatherization actions. There's a few of them in here that speak to the renters as well.
David and Ann, what do you think?
I think that's important because I noticed that too. And in fact, when I thought that all of these actions were strategies, I actually wrote a little bit about each one. And I did notice, and I mentioned that renters, we're not really addressing renters specifically, and we probably ought to be.
Yeah, I don't know if we can do that through landlord assistance programs or something like that, but yeah, we need to address it.
Can I add a follow on to what Dave just said? When Jane and Secretary Moore and I testified to House Energy, I forget which legislator's name it is, but apparently she owns a lot of property, as a landlord, owns a lot of property. Immediately she was like, how am I going to make these changes to all the buildings I own? So it would be good to make some mention, I think, of landlord assistance, Dave, just because I know that that's going to be coming.
Right. Other things on pathway 3 before we move to pathway 4. And it sounds like Dave and Ann are going to kind of take this up and do some cleanup and finishing up over the weekend. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. Thanks, Dave. Okay. All right. Pathway 4. Whose is that?
No,
Chris.
no, it's Chris. I'm sorry.
There's a
That's
split
me.
between Chris and Erica.
So, so I went, I'm not a member of this committee, so I feel really bad about this, but I went with, because the pathway said change Vermont's land use policy, so current future land development will be adaptive, et cetera. And so I went with what I've identified as a core challenge we have, which is, if you just tee it up to our existing policies about how planning gets done, it may never get done because municipalities can opt in or out of planning and implementing those plans, et cetera. Both RPCs and municipalities have to have the political will to actually adopt those things. And so so the conclusion is that we need to really, like, if actions absolutely have to be taken to achieve adaptation resilience goals, especially those life safety ones in the near or immediate term, we really need to have an objective assessment about at what level of government those actions have to take place, because otherwise, they could be deferred off to 8-year planning cycles and other things like that, and it may just never happen. And that's not, I'm not trying to be mean to planning in Vermont. It's just the reality of the situation. And I have no idea if that's what you guys are looking for or not.
It kind of lays out the challenger problem to start. Joe, you have a comment or question?
I've never really liked the way this pathway is drafted.
No changing it now.
And I mean, I sort of feel like it's starting out with talking about the policies is not the right way to talk about it. And I think that it should, you could just say, you could get rid of everything before the word and including the word so, and just start with current and future land use development will be, et cetera. And I guess it depends on the actions that are down below. But if they're all just policies, then maybe it's appropriately written. But I just feel like it always feels weak to me when we start out by saying, well, let's just change the policies. But that's not really the goal here. The goal is the outcome is about the land use, not about the policies. The policies are the one sort of a technique or a suite of strategies that you might use to get to that land use. But isn't it really the outcome this pathway should be focused on and not the policies?
But Joe, I would argue the policies are a big part of the problem.
It's worth noting the actions are a combination of policy and program changes, by the way. But Joe, let's hold on to this thought. Let me take another comment from Bronwyn, and we'll continue to noodle this a bit. Bronwyn.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to also argue that, and I think there's something to be said for listing something as what the outcome is, but with a lot of the other strategies, it is talking about, are we removing policy barriers? That's the strategy to getting that outcome, or are we incentivizing with funding? That's the way to get the outcome. So I hear you on, I certainly hear you on this pathway has always been a little funky. I think part of it was because we started from a place where we were trying to be everything to everyone in terms of land use, and that sort of made it challenging to make it all nice and concise in a pathway. One other comment about the paragraph overall, Chris Campany, this is the kind of writing where I want to have like a little glass of bourbon with me and just like really get into it, because it's a very fun writing. But even for me, it was a little hard to digest. So I do think I see the points that are in there, but I think it might be hard for the average audience member to pull out the points. The way you described it right now was really digestible. So I think we just may need to edit it down a bit so that it's more of like a 6th grade reading level.
Do I need to do that right now?
Only if you have a glass of bourbon.
That's something to do for the weekend.
After my 21st birthday, I can't touch bourbon ever again.
Story for
too much
another day.
information, but yeah.
Drink of choice. Okay. So I don't know, when I do look, I guess, yeah, the question is, so for the framing, it could change Vermont's land use policies and increase programs. It could, what do you want to do any change to the actual wording of the pathway itself, Catherine? Catherine, I think you're back.
I wasn't to answer that question, so if somebody had
Okay.
thoughts on that, they should jump in ahead of me.
No problem. Can we live with it as is, or do you want to make a specific recommended change?
I can live with it the way it is. I think it could be better, but if that's what the committee wants, I'm fine with it. I guess what's really important are the actions more than, quite frankly, the wording and the pathway.
Okay. Great, thanks, Jeff, for that. Appreciate it.
For what it's worth, I like it, but I think it needs to be said.
Good. I think we'll leave it for now. If kind of maybe make more kind of sort of hone up or harness a little bit with drink in hand, the first paragraph or two. Anything else on pathway 4, Catherine?
Yes, I agree. I agree with everything that was written under pathway 4, and also agree that it could be written in a way that was a little more digestible. So thank you, Chris, for putting those thoughts out there and making sure they're included in the plan. And I too had to break up with Jack a long time ago, so it wouldn't be bourbon now. Scrolling down a bit for strategy 1 here, my main comment about this, if we could move on, is that the discussion below here talks primarily about the necessity for water and sewer capacity and increasing that. There's a lot of discussion about that, which I agree with wholeheartedly. However, when you scroll down to the actions, there's not a single action that talks about giving more money to that. So I think there was a disconnect, and somehow if those actions didn't get prioritized, I think it probably ought to be a prioritized action. And so maybe we could go back and find one of our actions and elevate it if it makes sense.
Chris, can you go back and look at the original spreadsheet with all the actions, and maybe, to Catherine's point, find the ones that maybe make sure there's a little more consistency between strategy, writing, and actions?
Were those actions in pathway 2? I'm just wondering if they were included under infrastructure.
There was a lot of shuffling around,
Chris.
and it got confusing where things were living.
So can we find one and toss it in there? Because it seems to make sense.
Oh no, there was absolutely a more money.
I knew there were.
Yeah.
And I think I may have actually drafted that language accidentally. I think actually I was tagged to help edit this section. Somebody else was going to draft it, but I think it was the fact. I guess maybe nobody was actually assigned, but I was supposed to help edit it. So I just drafted it as best I knew how. So if somebody else wants to take a run at it, because I don't know what else you guys talked about. So
I confess that I think I may have been the person who was responsible for splitting actions between resilience and the new compact settlement section pathway in section 15. And so I'm wondering if one of those actions is sitting over there as a compact settlement action.
I wonder,
That's why we go through at the end.
Exactly. Bron, would you be willing to maybe look what you sent over, maybe grab one or two to Catherine's point and send it to Chris just to add? Is that doable? And then Chris will know what to put in there. Is that all right?
Yep.
Jens.
Just organizationally, I agree with everything, Chris, that all the points that are made in that introduction, but with some of the shifting that's gone on, the strategies don't really support, don't really address that introductory language. And so I think something got shifted to pathway 5 and some stuff has gotten shifted into other chapters. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect there.
I think that is true. And I'm given where we are in time, we maybe make some modest adjustments to Catherine said. We kind of clean up the writing a bit. And then we may have to revisit some of this when we look at the whole again, in the coming weeks, because I think it's absolutely right. Chris Campany, I have a question for you. I think people are asking for kind of a little more concision or cleanup of some really rich language. Are you okay doing that, or do you want someone else to do that?
On both sections?
Just on pathway 4.
Yeah. I'm planning to work on that this afternoon. I'll probably work on it while we're talking.
What? I'm shocked. Okay, thank you. All right, anything else on this before we go to pathway 5? We only have about 20 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get pathway 5 in too.
Chris, you did a nice job double tasking with the equity language, so we have faith.
Was that okay?
Yeah, I liked it.
Okay.
And let's see, Mary, let's make sure we copy that so Erica gets that if Erica's not back on right now. Bronwyn, over to you.
Oh, right. Is Erica not on right now?
Is she back? She wasn't. I think she's not.
No, I thought she had to jump for the full
Okay.
meeting, the rest of the meeting. I have already copied Chris's language though, so I'll put it in the notes.
You're the best. Thank you. See, we barely live without you.
So I guess I can follow up with Erica over email, and I just wanted to I don't know if anybody else struggled with this. It might be that I'm just not familiar with some of the funding programs, but from the paragraph on strategy 2, if we can scroll down to that. I was reading through it. It was nice, short, concise, high level. I just got a little turned around and I felt like I couldn't understand whether federal funding is a good thing and we just need a separate fund to be able to provide the match, or if federal funding is sometimes a bad thing and it's the requirements are too onerous. And so I feel like it could have been a more concise statement that like a separate fund is great because A, it will help us provide the 25% match when federal funding is desirable and is something we want, but then also provides a source of funding when federal funding is not appropriate for a project we wanted. I think that's what this paragraph was trying to say. But again, it was like one of those like bourbon paragraphs where it's really it's like, I love that sentence about flood-related hazard mitigation projects boast a 7-to-1 return on investment. I love that sentence, but I don't know that it's, something that's digestible by the average person. So I just wanted to flag that as well, that I struggled to get through this paragraph and really understand what it was saying.
And Chris, was this a paragraph you wrote or Erica wrote?
This was Erica.
Erica did.
Mhm.
And I can take this back and Stephanie and I can work on cleaning it up a little bit.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, and Chris is going to continue to refine the equity language with some additional comments from Ben, so that's good. All right. Okay. So Ben, you'll on this pathway to that paragraph, you'll take that back to clean that up. So okay.
Yeah.
Who owns this document right now, Bronwyn? Do you own the document right now for pathways 1? Okay.
I do.
All right, so people should work then through Bronwyn. Okay, pathway 5. Whose is that? Chris Cochran, over to you.
Yeah, I would say this is my pathway, but I was heavily edited by a certain person who will remain unnamed. Quickly, it's this got a little bit adjusted as well in our shuffle to creating the cross-sector pathway. It was initially kind of focused on creating more housing opportunities in centers. Now it's exclusively focused on kind of housing is fundamental. You need a house, you need a safe house, you need a decent place to live, and it's fundamental to everything else in our life. There were several, I think it started with 5 strategies that separated out kind of, private ownership and public ownership of housing. Those were collapsed together because there was only one action under one, and they were all kind of give money to. So I combined those, I think, into it's strategy 2, increase investments in the preservation and development of both public market and nonprofit owned housing. Basic strategies are, we need more of this. We have a crisis. It's going to take money. It's going to take people, and it's going to take policy alignment to make that happen. And then the last one is, we know during the pandemic we have a homeless problem challenge that we need to continue to address. And we've made some incredible investments thanks to the CARES Act funding, but we can't let up. I think one of the frustrations, I think, to me and some of this planning is we're looking at a 4-year horizon and what the priority actions are. This is something that we're never going to finish, and we need to always continue to work on.
So ready for any questions or comments, Chris?
Yeah.
All right, questions, comments about this piece? Catherine.
First, sorry for all my jumping around. My back's bugging me, so I have to keep standing up to move around and stretch. So I think with culmination of all the edits that have been done to this action, we've lost all of the, first of all, we've gained a recognition of people as part of this, which has been great, which was great. But I think what we've lost is a connection to location and the compact settlement and location efficient, as well as generally energy efficient of the building itself. So I think somehow in all the edits, we lost that location piece, which I think is key. We don't want to lose, because we don't just want more housing everywhere.
Sure. Yeah, it lives in another spot though, but maybe we need to cross-reference.
But it's a crucial part of housing, so it bears repeating.
Yeah, Chris, to your point, can cross-reference it. So it's very clear that we also want to refer to compact settlement recommendations in X, and then.
Yeah, and I think in the narrative,
Yeah, I think it wouldn't hurt to say it twice, and it can be said twice efficiently, I think.
Okay.
Keeping with the theme.
Oh, sorry, Catherine, say again.
I just said in keeping with the efficiency theme.
Ben.
I agree with that. And there was some discussion in an email thread, a suggestion from Seth Jensen from Lamoille Regional Plan Commission, which Chris Campany really liked as well, to explicitly call out that for every structure or residential unit bought out of a flood-prone location, 2 units of housing should be created in a well-sited, not flood-prone location, in a village center or something to that effect. And I really like that as an aspirational, measurable, achievable goal that ties housing to reducing flood vulnerability.
So Ben, are you suggesting a new action, or how do you want to handle that?
I don't know. We sort of posed it to the working group chairs as what are we going to do with this? It's a little late, but it's good.
To me, that's one of the things that would be considered when you're building out the implementation of some of our other action recommendations, like the local buyout program. I would say fundamentally, I have some concerns about that in terms of buyouts being important for life safety and not making them any more difficult. And
right, but we can't do them because people can't afford to leave even 100% of value because they don't have a place to go.
Not disagreeing with that, but I think I would need a lot more discussion on that particular recommendation to be able to support it. But I do support considering it as part of the implementation of some of the other actions.
So why don't we make sure there's a strong link between location and affordable housing as noted? We're not going to get into the specifics of particular policies or sort of trade-offs at this point, but we can definitely do that as I think asked for.
I think it's an easy 1 or 2 sentences in the introductory talking about the importance of location.
Agreed. Other things people want to talk about in pathway 5 in addition to the crosswalk? Okay.
I love being at this part of the meeting. I just wanted to know everybody's tired. Like
So I'm thinking, did we cover all the sections? Have we covered everything that is in some place or another? I want to make sure we have. Should be everything, right? Bronwyn. Double hand, by the way, nice.
I guess this is just, somebody said something earlier about the renters. There's a higher proportion of renters that are BIPOC. I do think this housing piece, I don't have the data, but I am sure that we have data that relates and we can really name some of these challenges around who is most likely to be homeless, who is most likely to be a renter, and the inequity in our housing, and just really call it out specifically here. I do think we could probably put a little bit more effort into that.
Ron, a question for you. Are you able to find the data directly yourself and then send it, say, to Chris to enter or not?
We can work on that. When's this due? Is it Monday? When do we have to get this done?
We'll come back to that in a second, but roughly, yes.
Yeah, if I can get some time on Monday, we can get that.
It's a good suggestion, Ron. So make it all, it'll bring literally to light in a very clear and specific way.
And I think it's worth noting that even addressing people who are houseless is getting to an equity issue by helping those who are of lower income.
So let's talk about, so I think where we left it is, rather than everyone sitting red line comments, everybody, we try to go through the document today. Authors have got some additional work or suggestions to do. There will be a little cross back and forth, as needed. So I think the question is, Marion, this partly comes to you. I think once we have all the authors sending in their pieces of their final version for now, like how are we going to kind of pull it all together, clean it up, do a little bit of copy editing, et cetera? And Marion, is that something that falls on you, or were you thinking something different?
I'm happy to take that on. I wasn't thinking I'm happy to do that if that makes sense for folks. I'll share the notes that I have. I know folks have been taking their own notes as well. So if we want to follow the timeline that Pat laid out earlier, or if we want to follow something slightly different, I think we should talk about that. But that would mean authors of sections have their edits in by end of the day Monday and send those to me Tuesday morning. Is that what we discussed?
I think what we said is essentially midnight Monday, or opening for business 8 o'clock if you're early riser, early 8 in the morning on Tuesday, so that Marion has essentially half a day to integrate, copy, edit, include, and then post. So how does that sound to authors? Get her something Monday night, however late it might be. How does that feel? Doable?
Good.
Okay. All right. So then, Marion, it'll be in your excellent hands. Well rested, hopefully, and to go through. I think you'll ask for a copy edit and things like that, which I'm sure you'll do a great job of. And then again, Climate Council will give comments. We have some more time to continue to finesse this, but I think we're kind of heading there. So anything else for now on the process or the substance as we try to bring this to posting?
What was our? I can look it up. I think we did our footnotes and referencing wrong. Is it?
No.
I don't remember the exact good direction on endnotes or footnotes. Marion, that may be one thing you have to.
I can share it with the email there. I don't exactly remember the exact language that we put, but it's in the CAP drafting guidance. So I'll reshare that and just make sure it's clear for everyone. But also not a big deal. As long as your sources are in there, I can do that too. So.
All right. So Jane, we went through all sections, and we're just kind of talking about next steps. So that's where we're at now. So I do note that on the agenda was talking about the co-chair's presentation to the council on the 9th, but we're probably almost out of time. So is that something, Catherine, you want to cover now? Is that something you want to wait and cover next Friday? What's your preference?
I think that unless anybody on the subcommittee wants to have some really strong opinions about how we'll present this at the Vermont Climate Council, if you want to just leave it up to Erica and I, we're going to take the highlights that everybody drafted and hit those. Because I have this great hope. Again, I haven't said it out loud now, like I did last week about something else, but I'm hoping we don't need to meet next week and that we can all take a week off, because I'm not sure we will have anything that we have to do. So
everybody okay with Catherine and Erica taking your good work and preparing the presentation for the Climate Council on the 9th?
Yes. Can I pause on that for a minute? Yeah, I do just want to suggest that one of the things that, what Marion's doing for you all, I'm doing for the resilience section for Ag and Eco, and Marley Roop, state staff, is doing for the sequestration section for Ag and Eco. Based on those final drafts, we will create, and I'll probably circulate it with the co-chairs to ensure that it's consistent language, but we'll probably create a similar a summary of strategies and actions one to two pager, which is what we did for cross sector, to send out with the reports in order to elevate and lift up a survey that goes to the council on Tuesday night with the posting of all these documents and the agenda for the following week. And so what will happen, and you'll have the benefit of this in a way that cross sector isn't having really, because cross sector won't get the results of that survey till Monday and they have to present on Tuesday. So they'll be scrambling in order to provide experts on sort of being able to speak to the issues that are lifted up in the survey. But I would encourage that we'll have the review of that survey and what folks are seeing as issues or wanting more information on for your presentation. And we'll be able to share that with you next Friday when you meet. If you choose not to meet, you can handle it a different way. But my suggestion would be that you met and you would have that benefit of that survey to prepare for how you're going to communicate around those issues to the council. Issues, opportunities, I should say, not necessarily issues, but.
So that's new information I didn't have. So I guess we stay tuned about our need to meet next week.
Maybe why don't people hold on their calendars? The co-chairs can check in with Marion and Jane as they often do early next week, and then we can kind of confirm it for sure next week, but maybe hold it for now on the calendar. Does that make sense?
Sure.
I know people have been working hard. Okay.
So I just also wanted to throw out that I know that some council members who are doing the drafting may not have the opportunity to spend as much time with the cross-sector mitigation action recommendations as they might like, just from a timing perspective. So just want to acknowledge that and the timing of that, and hope that there's some grace offered to our council members who are trying to do both in the same period of time, to give them extra time if needed. So I'll just throw that out there just as a request. And then I guess we'll switch it over to public comment unless there's anything else that council members have to say. Oh, I do have two more things that I just want to put a marker on, but we don't have to talk about right now, but I just want to throw it out there for everyone's reference. I have two questions about things in the cap and where they're going to sit that I think we can talk about at a future meeting perhaps. And one is the committee goals that we spent so much time with. They were included in a draft section, but then there was some feedback that wasn't quite right. So I just want to make sure they'll have a home in the end, and I don't want to lose that. And then number two, given where we are, I think we as a committee have many next steps that might be different than perhaps some of the other committees. And so I just want to make sure there's space in the cap for us to be able to articulate those. So I'll throw that out for a future conversation, but not for the draft we're working on for Tuesday. Any other thoughts from councilors and committee members, Chris?
One comment, and it was before we started engaging, but I know there was a vulnerability assessment that this committee needed to do, and I don't know how that gets referenced in the cap. Is that just in appendices like we did it?
We haven't done it.
Oh, we
started talking about it. GMP had done a lot of really great foundational work that we're hoping to use, but with the timing of the other work we had to do, we ended up setting it aside.
Okay.
One of our actions in pathway 2 to still be done.
And that's the kind of the thing I'm talking about in terms of, next steps.
Yeah.
And those actions Erica mentioned that are in the Global Warming Solutions Act that are outside of actually drafting the cap.
That's what Ann just asked for money for earlier in this meeting.
All right, Dave and Chris.
Thanks, Catherine. I just wanted to let the group know that the Regional Development Corporations invited Chris Campany and Catherine to come and talk about the work of the Climate Council at their meeting next Friday. So one more public outreach event initiative.
Thanks, Dave. And Chris?
This real utilitarian question. Who's got, should I just, the edits that I'm finishing up, I just emailed in a Word document to Marianne and Bronwyn and the other, the chairs of this committee and all. Is that the best approach at this point? Because I don't want to screw up any other documents. Is it best to just, in other words, who's got control? Should I just send the new language to one person, a group of people to then be plugged in? What's the suggestion?
Hadn't thought that far yet. I had turned off, so I kept our original redlined document because I wanted to retain that work. And then I sent a clean version, which is what we were looking at today. And I have not given anyone access to that clean version because I also turned off everyone's access to the previous version because I didn't want us to continue editing and to, you know.
Yeah.
I think
I'll just send an excerpt to the subset and you guys can figure out what to do with it.
I think that's probably the easiest thing to do.
So Bronwyn, just to be clear with you and Marion, so is the thought then any editing a chapter or section author does, maybe just pull that out, not rather than send the whole document now, but pull out that section that you worked on, label it with your name and pathway or strategy or whatever, and send it to Marion and Bronwyn? Is that the best way to do it, and keep it just so we don't lose version control? What do you think? It's really up to you guys. Marion and Bronwyn, do you have a viewpoint on that?
I don't really have a preference. As long as, yeah, sorry, my answers are not good today. So
Marion, can you two talk and figure out what makes sense so that we don't make more work for you?
Yeah, let us know, I think maybe.
I just sent the first chunk to you guys and also the chairs here, and because Ben contributed to it, I included him as well. So unless I'm going to keep working on this stuff, so I'll just do the same thing.
Sounds
good. Let us know.
And Chris, I'll use that same CC list for the edits that I volunteered Stephanie and I to do on that flood mitigation program language.
Yeah, I think
and I'm going to turn off my policy geek in my brain so I write more plainly.
I guess I would just, if I end up being the one to do this, I would just ask that you be really specific and clear if you have a new section of text, where it's inserted, and if it is replacing other text. I don't really know what that looks like, if it means like delete lines 17, 18, 19 and replace with this, or just to be really clear so that I don't accidentally just add a bunch of text as opposed to replacing text or whatever else. So very clear instructions for me, and especially for Marianne because she's jet lagged.
And I know I do have to jump too. So Catherine and Marion, I'll turn.
Yeah, I got it.
You got it. Thanks.
Joe, you're muted.
Just a quick question. So the pathway 2 is in a separate document. I mean, how should that get consolidated? Or is it okay? I keep it that way and someone else will take care of consolidating it.
I'm doing the consolidating. So final edits will come to me. I'll figure out with Bronwyn how to get those edits, but I will be doing the consolidating. So you don't need to worry about that.
Thank you, Marianne. All right, any other comments from committee members or members of the public? No? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, thank you, everybody, for so much wonderful work. I think it's a great reflection of our subcommittee, the work that you all did. So thank you for putting us in such a great light for our presentation to the Climate Council and to everybody who's paying attention outside of that. Appreciate everything. Enjoy the rest of your day and try not to float away this weekend with all the rain.
Catherine, thanks to you and Erica for your leadership. I know it's not been fun navigating these waters, but I appreciate all the efforts that you both have put into this.
Well, I appreciate everyone who's had their oars in the water and keeping us from tipping over.
And if anybody wants to join us in steering committee right now, you're welcome to. It's a beautiful afternoon for.
You haven't met enough.
I think Bronwyn had the right idea with her comment.
Bye.
See you guys.
Bye, everybody.